Morning, friends. Good to be with you again. I can't see all of you. This is the third part of modest course here on reading the writings of Shoghi Effendi. There's so much to say about these quotations, these documents. Some of them that we haven't visited for a long time. The friends have not seen it yet. They're so essential because we're all surrounded by the challenge of answering questions like, what is the Baha'i faith? And the second one would be, who is Baha'u'llah? What is Baha'u'llah like? Can you describe Baha'u'llah? Can you describe the Bab? Can you describe Abdullah? All these questions are very challenging for us. If you think, what do I answer? There's 1,000 answers possible. And the point of these exercises now, looking at these summary documents, resume documents, is how did Shoghi Effendi describe them? Out of all the possibilities that he had before him, what was his vision? And to the degree that it's possible to absorb that vision and reflect it in our own conversations and presentations of the faith. Very highly valuable kind of exercise from that point of view. So I wanted to start this morning with something a little different. We want to describe the Baha'i faith. We have an example of description of the faith, in a sense, an essence, an extraction, the essence of Baha'u'llah's revelation in the quotations that are above the 9 exterior entrances of the house of worship in Wilmette, and also above the alcoves, 9 alcoves inside the house of worship, constituting 18 quotations. Now, the National Assembly here asked the Guardian, please choose what we can put over the temple doors. He wrote back and he said, that's fine, your assembly can choose what they think is suitable. And they wrote him again and said, please, Shoghi Effendi, we can't decide anything big. Please, Shoghi Effendi, you choose for us. And after going back and forth a few times with that, he finally sent these quotations himself, which he selected with his vision as the sign of God on earth, the inheritor of the whole revelation, and the figures, the central figures before him. Now, can you imagine how you would do that? Never mind that you don't have the translations or everything. And even in some cases, Shoghi Effendi modified the translations already published to shorten it so it'll fit within the space available above the doors. And I want to share now those with you. And they're in documents that you can download so that you can look at them yourself. And I wish I could tell you I have them all memorized. I don't, but I certainly highly recommend that they be memorized because they'll come out in your explanations of the faith once you absorb them. So let me see how I do this now. I need to share screen. Now you've got that on your screen now. You can see that. All right. This is the baha'i that we've met now. Subsequently, these quotations have been used in the other houses of worship around the world that are being built. I think because how are you going to better it? How are you going to better that? Now, Chile, they're in Spanish. That's think of an overview of the Baha'i faith. You have to describe the Baha'i faith in 9 quotes or 18 quotes. That would be 2 Here's what he's already done it for us. Without the trust in him, he lets us discover what it is. Now, when these were published, they've been published in a certain order, and I'm not sure how that corresponds to the order around them, but I think it's the earth is but one country. The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom with thy desires. My love is my stronghold. He that entereth therein is safe and secure. Grieve not the sins of others so long as thou art thyself a sinner. Thy heart is my home. Sanctify it from thyself. I have made death a messenger of joy to thee, wherefore dost thou grieve. Make mention of me on my earth, that in my heaven I may remember thee. O rich ones on earth, the poor in your midst are my trust. Guard ye my trust. The source of all learning is the knowledge of God. Exalted be his glory. Moving to the interior alcoves, we have these 9 phrases. All the prophets of God proclaim the same faith. Religion is a radiant light and an impregnable stronghold. You are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch.
Some of the audio wasn't working before, so some people are asking if you can explain what these quotes are again.
I understand maybe the audio wasn't working previously. These quotes are after the National Assembly consulted with the Guardian way back in the 30s and asked him for phrases suitable for placing over the doors of the house of worship and also above the alcoves in the interior of the house of worship. And Shoghi Effendi said they should choose their own, but after he was asked several times, he agreed, consented, and he sent these. So we're seeing here a resume of the essential truths and verities of the Baha'i faith, 18 of them selected by the sign of God on earth. A pretty good indication to us that we should have these in our repertoire when we're speaking about the faith and quoting passages from the writings. Now to go on with the list, ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. So powerful is unity's light that it can illumine the whole earth. Consort with the followers of all religions with friendliness. O Son of Being, thou art my lamp and my light is in thee. O Son of Being, walk in my statutes for love of me. Thy paradise is my love. Thy heavenly home is reunion with me. The light of a good character surpasseth the light of the sun. As I mentioned, maybe in case that was missing in the audio stream, these are now used in the other houses of worship that are being built around the world. Presumably, in most cases, translated into the language of the country where the house of worship is being built. In this connection, I wanted to tell a little story that I heard some years ago. There was a Baha'i teacher. She was quite a studious Baha'i, well prepared, well educated. She was traveling in Europe, even in Russia,
giving talks at universities and things. Her name was Helen Bishop. Helen Bishop was a very strongly rooted believer. She was asked for pilgrimage. She was invited on pilgrimage back in the 30s. And she went to the Holy Land. Now she tells this story on herself. She says that I was going to be at the Guardian's table. So I thought to myself, I should think up some really good questions. The questions that I ask will reveal something about me to the Guardian, and that would be good. So she comes to the Holy Land. She's the most recent pilgrimage, so she leads the group down the stairs, and Shoghi Effendi greets her so warmly and places her at his right hand. Then the other pilgrims arrive, he greets them. Then he begins talking to the pilgrims. He asks of each of the pilgrims, how are they and what's the news and do they have any questions and so on. Very friendly, but never looks again at Helen. Helen is getting very nervous. She feels that something's interrupted her connection with the Guardian there, and she wonders what it is. Finally, it dawns on her that she has these canned questions that she's going to ask the Guardian, and that's going to impress him. And when she does that, the scenario changes. Shoghi Effendi turns to her and very warmly says, "And Mrs. Bishop, you must have some questions." And she couldn't remember any questions at that point. The next night, she came back with another question. It was a simple question about how can she improve her ability to teach the faith. And Shoghi Effendi said, "Mrs. Bishop, you should memorize the hidden words." Now it's somewhat of an order, big order, but he said through that, then those hidden words will reflect out in your words and in your explanations and will enhance and strengthen your presentation of the faith. I mentioned that story in connection here because I would like to ask that you all look at these quotations, these 18 quotations, and see if you can find out where they're from. A number of them, as you probably have already observed, are for the hidden words. And indicative to you of the very central position that the hidden words has within the opus of Baha'u'llah's revelation. The outstanding ethical, preeminent ethical work of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi calls it, hidden words, in God Passes By. So see what you can do about finding those. And then I suggest that you reflect, you repeat these out loud and you reflect on how they relate to each other and everything else that's in the cause. In reinforcement of a letter the House of Justice has sent out to the Friends, or has been shared, the compilation that was previously shared at a 19-day feast from the House of Justice letters about racism and questions of the faith, was reissued with, I think, 2 or 3 additional letters added on that have been written since that first compilation was released. And would be worth looking back at that, because this letter, the House of Justice emphasizes the role of spirituality in the cause, and that everything is based on that. And the spirituality is the very center of the faith of God, and these quotes are the center of that spirituality. Now, most of them have to do with our relationship with God, our relationship with the knowledge of God. There's one here, which is, "O rich ones on earth, the poor in your midst are my trust. Guard ye my trust." Now, obviously, this has implications for social action, for helping the poor amongst us. We have the stories of the prophets of the past. One of the things that's remembered from Muhammad's family is that he said they should never go to sleep if they knew of any of the believers who were hungry, the friends who were hungry, people who were hungry. But the rest of these all have to do with inner realities. And this is the essence of the faith of God. Yes, we're here to serve mankind, of course, it all comes to that. But the service to mankind, if it's going to be lasting and valuable and produce result, needs to reflect the lights shining on us from these divine quotations. I want to move on now. Previously, I had something to say, if you'll recall, about the history of the faith. Shoghi Effendi describes for us various aspects of the central figures of the faith. I mentioned previously, how do you answer when someone asks, well, what was Baha'u'llah like? And one would say, how can I best describe Baha'u'llah? It's a challenge to us. But if we've been alert and watching the guardian's guidance to us, which remains definitely the guidance and interpretation, the stage of interpretation of the teachings has ended now, and Shoghi Effendi's interpretation is added to that of the master. And so certainly we want to be paying attention to it. And when we talk about studying the sacred writings, these are the kind of things I think we want to be taking note of, as recommended by the House of Justice and also repeated numerous times in the Ruhi studies that we have. So ask yourself, how can I describe Baha'u'llah? What would I say if people ask me about Baha'u'llah? Would I tell him how tall he is? Would I tell him that he wore a tall fez? What would I say? Now let's look and see what Shoghi Effendi has said. This is a combination of quotes from the Dispensation and then from Baha'u'llah, from the God Passes By. In the Dispensation, when Shoghi Effendi introduces the three central figures of the faith, he starts with that of Baha'u'llah, and then he moves on to the Bab, and finally Abdul Baha. Three central figures. When he speaks of a single figure, it's the central figure is always Baha'u'llah, and he comes first in the hierarchy of our faith. If he's describing the history of the faith, the stages of the unfoldment of Baha'i history, starts with the Bab. The Bab, as you'll see down below here, is one of the twin figures that stand at the center of our cause. Now, this is the miracle of our cause, that we have two divine manifestations of God inspiring our central institutions and all of our activities and knowledge of the divine rights. The light's coming from two of them. Extraordinary. Shoghi Effendi says when he refers to the twin figures, he says the Bab, allied with Baha'u'llah, but subordinate in character. So this makes Baha'u'llah the center, and the Bab keeps aiming everything he says to him whom God shall make manifest, to Baha'u'llah. And let's look at the characteristics, because this is very, very hard for us. Shoghi Effendi's been reading all of the histories of the early figures of the faith. He's been under the influence of Abdul Baha's explanations. And look how he describes Baha'u'llah. Incomparable, the incomparable figure of Baha'u'llah. Nothing compares to him in all of history. Transcendental in his majesty, serene, awe-inspiring, unapproachably glorious. Friends, I used to take these lists with me to the holy shrines, reading them in those blessed holy places, trying to absorb what the implications, what illumination is inherent. Look in these 5 characterizations he gives here, and then again in God Passes By, another set of them. The august figure of Baha'u'llah, preeminent in holiness, awesome in the majesty of his strength and power, unapproachable in the transcendent brightness of his glory. Repeat these phrases to yourselves. I hope you'll download these and look at them, then go and look at them in context in the Dispensation and in God Passes By. It's in the foreword of God Passes By where these are. Then there's certain basic facts about when we want to talk about the central figures that we need to have in mind, and very meritorious to memorize them. The birth of Baha'u'llah, the scope of his ministry, and his ascension when he was 75 years old. Moving on, we ask ourselves the same thing. Can we describe the Bab? Now, I remember when I first went pioneering to Central America, I met the first believer in Nicaragua. Her name was Blanca Maria, and she loved the faith, but she said, I'm really a Babi because nobody's told me anything about Baha'u'llah, and they've always, whenever we asked about the history, they've talked about the Bab and his history and his sacrifice, and I just love it. I think she would be equally enamored if she had more details about Baha'u'llah, but there was no God Passes By back in the 50s in Spanish, and there were no explanations of these things. So except for Baha'i teachers passing on tidbits, you were pretty much on your own. Now look how he describes, this is again Dispensation, the youthful glory of the Bab. Infinite in his tenderness, irresistible in his charm, unsurpassed in his heroism, matchless in the dramatic circumstances of his short yet eventful life. And then a parallel set, the youthful and irresistible person of the Bab, matchless in his meekness, imperturbable in his serenity, magnetic in his utterance, unrivaled in the dramatic episodes of his swift and tragic ministry. And then finally, details of his life. Again, his birth date, the range of his ministry, and his martyrdom when he was 30 years old. Then we come to the third of the central figures. In the beginning, we told we have 3 central figures in the faith. And Abdu'l-Baha is characterized as the perfect exemplar of the faith. And Shoghi Effendi defines him as in a character entirely apart from the one occupied by the twin figures that preceded him. So the Bab and Baha'u'llah are in a separate category altogether. He's described then by the guardian, of course, who, in this case, who was raised by Abdu'l-Baha. The vibrant, the magnetic personality of Abdu'l-Baha, reflecting to a degree that no man, however exalted his station, can hope to rival, the glory and power with which they who are the manifestations of God are alone endowed. The vibrant personality of Abdu'l-Baha, mysterious in his essence. You remember he's called the Sarullah. We'll come back into some of these details later on. Unique in his station, astoundingly potent in both the charm and strength of his character. No one can hope to rival Abdu'l-Baha in the whole of 500,000 years as from the position that he's in as the center of the covenant. Great manifestations of God will arise, obviously, over this long period. But there's this very special uniqueness to Abdu'l-Baha's station, the mystery of God and being so closely associated with Baha'u'llah. His words are not equal in rank to those of Baha'u'llah, though they possess an equal validity with the utterances of Baha'u'llah. So the correctness of them is affirmed. And Shoghi Effendi has said his interpretations extend to the holy books of the past. If he has the capacity to interpret Baha'u'llah's utterances, he surely penetrates the meaning and intention, God's intention in the Gospels and the Torah and the Quran. And here you have the details which you want to absorb if you haven't already of his birth and the range of his ministry, and finally his passing at the age of 77. Now we're going to move on to another document here. We've looked a bit at this in the past. This is a combination because now we're taking it in historical order rather than hierarchical order. Hierarchical order, Baha'u'llah is at the top, but historical order, obviously the Bab comes first. The Baha'i faith revolves around three central figures, the first of whom, and this is from this statement, a summary statement given to the UN committee. The first of whom was a youth. Now, I've broken these down because sometimes we don't keep track of the facts, or we read it, it's one sentence and it's over. But there are four things that you want to bear in mind here: that he was a youth, that he was a native of Shiraz, that he had his own name, Mirza Ali Muhammad, but that he became known as the Bab. How often when we talk about the Bab do we mention those four particular points? In May 1844, at the age of 25, he advanced the claim of being the herald, who, according to the sacred scriptures of previous dispensations, must needs announce and prepare the way for the advent of one greater than himself. These are essential characterizations of the mission and actions of the Bab, whose mission would be, according to those same scriptures, to inaugurate an era of righteousness and peace. And this era would be hailed then as the consummation of all previous dispensations. And it would initiate a new cycle in the religious history of mankind. What happened to him? Swift and severe persecution launched by the organized forces of church and state in his native land precipitated successively his arrest, his exile to the mountains of Azerbaijan, his imprisonment in the fortresses of Maku and Charik, and his execution in July 1950 by a firing squad in the public square of Tabriz. If we want a summary of what we want to say about the history of the Bab, these 4 points are essential. Think of them, remember them. then Shoghi Effendi also adds there in this reference to that period, that ministry of the Bab, that no less than 20,000 of his followers were put to death with such barbarous cruelty as to invoke the warm sympathy and the unqualified admiration of a number of Western writers, diplomats, travelers, and scholars, some of whom were witnesses of these abominable outrages and were moved to record them in their books and diaries. Now, friends, now you see he's addressing a UN committee of non-Baha'is. So he's filling them in on, these are essential things that the non-Baha'is need to hear about and know about. And later he comes back to actually recording a number of tributes at the end of this document from non-Baha'is about their views on the greatness and importance of the faith. Now we have a further breakdown. Again, it's another, this is the one we just looked at, I think. Yeah, this is the same one, okay. Contemplate, we have the Guardian has amazingly summarized and presented us with the review of the first century of the Baha'i faith, the first 100 years of the Baha'i faith in God Passes By. An extraordinary book, unparalleled in the history of mankind. He was able to give us an overview of that first century. He was able to balance the importance of the outstanding events of each of these, the period of these three central figures, and then of the subsequent opening years in the development of the administrative order of the faith and the launching of the divine plan. He's reduced things to essentials. Riyak Anum told me, she said, Shoghi Effendi has had to condense everything that he was writing. He had to reduce it. And you need to, when studying it, you need to think about it and expand it and consult associated histories, of which we have a lot in the cause, to enable you to fully appreciate how he has led the balance between all these events. Another important thing that he did, he reduced by history, he focused a vision on the succession of crises and victories in the cause. There's some of that in the beginning of God Passes By, and then it goes through the whole work. And he says that the history of the faith resolves itself into a series of crises and victories. The crisis comes, and then he defines what the victory was that resulted from that crisis. And this becomes important because otherwise you get these negative developments and you think, oh, the cause was doomed or what happened. But then Shoghi Effendi connects it with the blessings that come. Now this pattern, if I understand it correctly, is associated also with our individual lives as believers. We have crises and they produce victories. My calamity is thy providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance. Inwardly it is light and mercy. The local Baha'i communities as well go through crises and victories. National Baha'i communities go through crises and victories. You can look at your own life and see what the last year has produced. as a result of this process in your own individual development. It's wonderful to see that he's ordained for us sufferings to prove us and to prove to ourselves our own greatness, to reveal to us the gems that are hidden in our inner nature, that have been placed there, inherent in our characters from our Creator. We're not created equal. We have different jewels, different gems within us. They need to come out. They need to be illumined. They need to inspire us. But to do that, we have to be tested. We have to be measured as to see how firmly we hold to the writings, how firmly we adhere to the teachings of the faith. After acceptance of the cause, Shoghi Effendi says, the next most important thing is steadfastness in our belief. Very important, this word steadfastness. I used to look at the Baha'i prayer books, steadfastness. I said, well, I'm a Baha'i, what do I need? I don't need to read those. No, we're talking about steadfastness in a deeper consciousness inherent in the writings that we haven't attained yet, or we're in the process of attaining. So important for us to realize that the tests and difficulties that we have are bounties sent us by Baha'u'llah, who tells us he's closer to us than our life vein, and trust that they are from him, and try to discern their meanings, try to understanding their meanings. So this all comes back to the whole question of the history of the faith, the first century of the faith, the crises and victories, and the fundamental focus that Shoghi Effendi establishes in reviewing the ministries of these three central figures of the faith, how that plays into our own understanding of existence is just so rich. I don't know how we could ever express our appreciation for the guardian's sacrifice, what he did for us. And my goodness, what visitation of difficulties he had. I mean, likewise, reading God Passes By, you see what the manifestations suffered, and then what Abdul Baha suffered likewise. It's amazing. This seems to be the character of our lives here. And when we accept it with joy, and when the swords flash, we press forward, we gain the victory, as seems to be what's promised in any case. So in a sense, the writings of Shoghi Effendi reduce everything to essentials. And after that, Shoghi Effendi then begins to explain in the World Order letters, particularly, or before God Passes By, but he brings it up, how the faith relates to the specifics of the age that we're in, this first Baha'i century. How does it relate? And he gives us keys of how we can talk with people about the cause. And these consist of the very loving guidance he offers us in the World Order letters. The goal of a new world order and the unfoldment of world civilization being two of the primary ones. The third one being the dispensation. The dispensation is quite unique in that he calls it a review of the essential verities of the cause. And the House of Justice, when it outlined the need for having a study portion, an institute process back in the 60s, back in the 90s, it said that the principal purpose of this institute is to review the essential verities of the cause. Now, much of this has already come to us in the Ruhi courses that we're studying, but also they urge us to go back to the holy writers themselves, and will be after here looking at the foreword to God Passes By, which is another terrific overview of what the cause of God is by 1944. We'll go back to the dispensation and review these essential verities. That's, God willing, we'll be able to do that stage by stage. We want to, Shoghi Effendi, sometimes we read something in his writings and we don't know what's he referring to. He's talking about the Baha'i cycle. Oh, what's the Baha'i cycle? I mean, is that the dispensation, or is that the Baha'i era, or what are we talking about? If you go back to the beginning of his writings and you come along and study the Baha'i administration and then Citadel of Faith and the various documents, you find the answers to these questions. It's important for all of us to understand terms he was using, which he defined quite clearly, and that is cycles. We're told we live within universal cycles. Universal cycles, in this case, he says the Baha'i cycle is 500,000 years. And it includes the first 6,000 years, preliminary stages, the Adamic cycle of the prophets from Adam through to the Bab. This is then he says we have now, with the coming of the Bab, launched the Baha'i cycle, and that this is 500,000 years long. The whole series of independent manifestations of God that appear to carry forward divine civilization in the future. We're babes in the wood. We're just getting started here. Then he uses another word, eras. The Baha'i era, in this case, includes the dispensation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And the dispensation of the Bab is a rather slippery term. It's defined in a number of ways. You want to have them all in mind. In one sense, Shoghi Effendi says it lasts as long as Baha'u'llah's dispensation, because the dispensation of the Bab, Baha'u'llah is joined by the Bab as one of the twin luminaries that's shining on the development of our key institutions, the guardianship and the House of Justice, and then on all of us in our spiritual evolution. Baha'i era. Within the Baha'i era, you have the dispensation of the Bab, which in some cases can be considered 9 years. In some definitions, it's 19 years, when the laws of the Bab in his own period were superseded by the declaration of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. And then in this third definition, where it lasts as long as the dispensation of Baha'u'llah itself, because they're reigning together over the destinies of this terrific cycle. Then there's ages. Shoghi Effendi describes that 3 ages. We'll be getting into quotations about that, which starts with the heroic age. And within the age, you have epochs, and these epochs, the first epoch is the ministry of the Bab, the second epoch, the ministry of Baha'u'llah, the third epoch, the ministry of Abdul Baha. And finally, find the epochs of the development of the administrative order of the faith, which we're moving through gradually. When Shoghi Effendi comes to God Passes By, he describes 4 periods of Baha'i history, divides it into 4 periods. So it's, you want to understand the meaning of these terms and how they compare with each other. Shoghi Effendi once said, he said, what do the friends talk about in the summer schools? He said, if they don't read my writings, what do they have to talk about? How can they discuss these things? Very fundamental. Of course, we weren't reading very much at that time. I mean, I became a Baha'i in the last years of the guardianship, and realized how much there was to study and read, but hadn't really gotten to it until I left 2 years after becoming, well, I went pioneering to Central America, and I took the books with me, and thank goodness the pace of life slowed down to practically nothing, and I had a lot of time to read and outline and weigh what I could understand of Shoghi Effendi's writings. One thing we have clear in the writings is that this century, this first Baha'i century, now we're into this second one, but it's the greatest century of the whole Baha'i cycle of the whole 500,000 years. Now, the Guardian received a letter from Artemis Lamb asking if what happened in the universal cycles, the previous universal cycles of 500,000 years. And he received an answer saying that we don't know the length of the universal cycles of the previous cycles. We don't know their length, not necessarily 500,000 years. And that was a completely different stage of development, but there have been numerous universal cycles, he said, and the master has confirmed that also. And finally, we have the Guardian's vision of the future. In several messages he takes on and describes the stages of what's to come. He talks about 7 stages in the development of national Baha'i communities. That's a separate study by itself. And then finally, we have the epochs, what will be the outcome of the epochs of the formative age of the faith in which we're presently passing. And finally, what will be the outcome in the golden age of the faith, and what the implications and meaning are of the Baha'i Commonwealth of Nations and such phrases as that. Most of the development of world civilization and so on is destined to take place with the next manifestation of God. We're in the preliminaries here. You know that the dispensation of Baha'u'llah is defined as lasting no less than 1,000 years. But the key there also is no less than 1,000 years. We have writings in hand that describe that it may be 1,000, or it may be 5,000, it may be 10,000. We've got documents related to that. We have a talk recorded by the friends of Abdu'l-Baha in Egypt where he says it may be 15,000 years. Being the greatest century, the greatest period, the greatest, I don't mean century there, I mean the greatest dispensation of the Baha'i cycle, of the long Baha'i cycle, we have to have time to develop it. We don't seem to be moving very speedily along. We're trying our best, all right? The House of Justice is urging us forward, but the condition of materialism has its grip on humanity. Yeah, let's see. All right, now. One of the things then Shoghi Effendi does for us is he outlines the outstanding events of the ministries of the 3 central figures. I don't think it's clear to us. I think it's clear to the Persian friends who had various histories contradicting each other and giving various versions of the unfoldment of Baha'i events, of how important it was that Shoghi Effendi combed that all out, clarified it, and showed us the relative relationship of events, which were more important events, which were the secondary events, how they related to each other, how they interacted with each other. All of that is inherent in God Passes By. I wondered, let's see now, I'm going to take a look at the chat, the various questions you may have addressed, see if there's some things I could answer there for you in these last minutes. Can you provide a reference for the 6,000 years of the Adamic cycle being included in the Baha'i cycle? Or did I misunderstand what you said? No, that you didn't misunderstand. There's a letter of the Guardian that explains that it includes those 6,000 years of the Adamic cycle. They're part of the universal cycle we're in. And if you look at the chapter on universal cycles, in some answered questions, you'll move towards that. And then this other letter, I'd have to look up and see where it is, but you can find it easy enough, I think. It's been published for sure. That seems to cover the various questions that you have. Anyone else have anything else they want to comment on right now? I'll see if I can address it. This is a difficult way to give a class when you can't see the people that you're talking to. We have another question here about, are you aware of any reference regarding the position of sitting while saying the 95 times Allah Apah? I think it's in the Akdas itself, it says to, if I recall correctly, sit cross-legged. Exactly what that means, that's a good question in itself, but it doesn't seem to be the same as sitting back on your heels as you do in various aspects of some of the obligatory prayers.
There's also a question about the divine economy.
Could you talk about the timing of the golden age? Someone's asked about. The golden age is the third age in the Baha'i era and Baha'i dispensation. And it's the age of fruition. From simple stories of the Guardian, the examples that he gave one about, which was the tree of divine revelation. He said that Baba Baha'u'llah planted the tree of divine revelation that was watered by the blood of 20,000 martyrs and is growing now as a green plant, and it will eventually flower. When it flowers, this is the administrative order. When it flowers, it becomes the world order of Baha'u'llah. And when those flowers bear their fruit, that will be the divine civilization, golden age of the faith. Golden age includes within it then the divine civilization. I asked him about the position of the repetition of the greatest names. Is it the Heikali Tawheed? I can't answer that directly. I haven't seen any reference confirming that. It could well be, but you could ask the Persians about that.
They turn unto God, seat himself and turn unto God is an actus. You might be asking about the divine economy.
Someone's asking about what's the reference to divine economy? Divine economy, I think the specific reference we have to that is in the the goal of a new world order, one of the world order letters that's found in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. Look there, because that's the source of it. Baha'u'llah has brought the essentials of a divine economy. The details have to be worked out with an evolving humanity and the guidance of the House of Justice. Friends, a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to seeing you next week, if you're still available. I don't seem to have anywhere I have to go in the meanwhile, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to see your faces. I don't know if I can find that. I think I can maybe, can I see you all here somewhere?
No, there's no way.
No way. All right. Thanks again. Bye for now.